Stop, halt, hold, but then run, sprint. After that, I want you to relax, consider, and cogitate what I'm about to tell you. Language is a construct created by humans which allows us to compartmentalize and make sense of our own reality. Language, unlike mathematics, is not etched into the fabric of reality. When we study mathematics, for example, we are studying something which is already there. It exists independently of humans. We are discovering new things rather than creating. When we study language, though, we are studying an innately human thing. This is not to say that language is somehow inferior to mathematics. Language has incredibly large implications for not only how we think, but how we perceive. Things like love, family, fulfillment, and, in the case of this channel, games. The stop, halt, hold, run, sprint, relax, consider, cogitate is a setup I want to introduce about the game Flesh and Blood. That being autologicality. Autologicality, or autological words, are words that represent themselves in some way. Traditional examples of these are short, English, and polysyllabic. Short is a word which is short. English is written in English, and polysyllabic has 5 syllables. We take these things for granted, but they are interesting to uncover when we sit with them for a while. Imagine the word for multisyllables was pot, or the word to describe our language was speaker, or the word to describe something short was onomatopoeia. When reviewed in this way, we see how awkward and strange language can become. We name things based on some kind of internal logic. The words stop, halt, hold, while not the strictest autological words out there, adhere to some of the self-referential concepts laid out by autologicality. Stop is fast to say, as in stop immediately. Same goes for halt and hold. Run, sprint are also fast. Hell, fast is fast to say. Whereas relax, consider, the words themselves offer a moment to ponder and wonder. They use longer vowel sounds to slow the speech pattern down. Consider, by comparison, uses a long vowel sound in the O, then the second half of the word sitter is tactile and polysyllabic, evoking a sense of step-by-step thought. Now, I'm aware that the opening for this video is some pretty dense stuff for a piece of content about a trading card game, even for me. So let's talk about Flesh and Blood and why I want to link these two concepts together in the context of the game. There is a degree of separation and adherence when it comes to autologicality in game design. While there are words which are self-referential, such as level, words like this fail an autological test. Level itself is not shaped like a level, nor does it display a hierarchical structure. But what we can do is slightly expand the definition of autological to encompass game design terms. Games are packed with words that exist solely to aid players in understanding their mechanics. A health potion conveys its ludo function, not its world function. Some games will try to obfuscate this by naming the health potion to medicine or herbs or something, but those terms fall under the umbrella of a health potion. But why do games use these ludological terms? I believe the obvious answer is for the sake of another game design term, Grokability. Grokability, or Grokable, or to grok, is a jargon which means, in my own definition, the ability to understand something deeply and instinctively upon first glance. The term, for what it's worth, was coined by the science fiction author Robert Heinlein in Stranger in a Strange Land. If you want to learn more about Heinlein, Google Mr. B-Tongue and find his series on the Game of Thrones. You'll thank me later. Anyway, back to Grokability. The last thing a game designer wants for their game is for the player to not understand how to play it. Just like the last thing I want for my fiction is for readers to not understand it. Artists and developers must choose very carefully how they portray information so that it maximizes the intended effect of the information. If I want to write a simple exposition section of a story, I will make that very grokable. I will use quaint language. I will use direct sentences. However, Should I desire a segment of my chronicle to conjure confusion on the part of the protagonist, I will write that section utilizing much longer form, more esoteric diction. The same goes for game designers. The grokability of the word dominate is clear and present. It does what's on the box. Dominate is an interesting word because while it describes a sort of ham-fisted action, evoking a sense of brute force, the intricacies of pronouncing the word dominate leaves room to more flighty interpretations, which is all the better for characters like the Rangers, whose conception of dominate differs vastly from their Guardian counterparts. Now take this in contrast to phantasm, reprise, or invocation. The words themselves have a more confusing definition and evoke completely different images in the mind. It is difficult to explain how tasking it can be to design something which is grokable. I applaud LSS for their effort to conjure words which seem to so effortlessly aid players in their decisions as they navigate the wildly complex world of sequence-based, value math-oriented World of Card games. And to do so while still being relatively evocative of their world is truly something. However, I do think LSS can go a bit too far in their game-centric reasoning. In our Gorgonian Tome first, I will actually spend some time critiquing things about Flesh and Blood. I know! I can't believe it either. But after investigating this, and many other concepts for months, I ran across something that does in fact bother me a bit. And that is that the game world of Flesh and Blood is in fact a game, and reveals itself as such through the naming conventions present in the world of Rathe. While this is a good thing for grokability, it does come with some downsides on the world building front. When I think of world building as a concept, I am immediately taken to two thoughts. The first thought is a memory of my fiction professor, Pinckney Benedict, discussing one of the grand pitfalls of the television series The Walking Dead. He said that part of why the world of The Walking Dead is difficult to believe at times is because culture doesn't develop in that world. At least not how it does in our world. More explicitly, the characters in The Walking Dead don't name things. They don't develop a history with the audience by naming the great battle of the prison, or don't name the day their world fell apart. Humans name things. It's what we do, even in the face of apocalypse. If we view our own world as inspiration for fictional worlds, we can judge a world based on its level of confidence in its own existence. Which brings me to my second thought. Our world, Earth, is incredibly confident in its existence. It's so confident, in fact, that we believe it at face value. We name things like the Battle of Waterloo, or more prolonged events like the Black Plague. These moments are etched into our history and shared experience through our language. They carry a meaning and a weight, and this carries on down the line of everything we name. The capital city of the United States is Washington, D.C., which is named after the first president of the nation, George Washington. And DC is short for District of Columbia, after Christopher Columbus, the man who supposedly discovered, quote-unquote, North America. Hilariously, our world is so confident in its existence that it is actually okay with being wrong about the facts of our own reality. So, fictional worlds are ultimately going to be judged on this basis. Verisimilitude, a $10 word meaning the appearance of being true or real, will be the basis of our discussion on world building, with Earth being the control case, as it were. Now, full disclosure, I am not a fan of puns. I am one of those guys who will actively not laugh at a pun, even if I think it's funny, because I am trying to dissuade the punner from making another one. But I especially am not a fan of puns in world building. Bear that innate bias in mind as we go through this next section. I also want to preface this next section by saying Flesh and Blood and LSS are far from the only creative teams to do some of the things listed below. If anything, this essay is a critique on current thought when it comes to fantasy world building. When we take a look at the map of Rathe, which Rathe itself is an anagram for Earth, we see that each point of interest in the world has a varying degree of autocologicalisms applied. Solana, probably the best of the names, is derived from the word soul. The word soul comes from the ancient Roman religion for their sun god, the Greek equivalent being Helios. The autologicalism here is that Solana is light place. I would have preferred Rathe to have a different word for light, or at least a different god for light, than utilizing one that comes from an already existing pantheon in our current world. Moreover, the denizens of Solana are expansions of the light theme of Solana. While this adheres to the philosophy of Grokability, it does serve the opposite function in world building. Prism is obviously a reference to a prism, which is an object that refracts light. Bolton is obviously a reference to a bolt of lightning, though one could argue that Bolton is meant to convey speed, but I'll just move on from there for obvious reasons. I've also heard he's based on Usain Bolt, the famous Olympic runner. Finally, we have Levia, whose name I can only imagine to mean Leviathan due to her Cthulhu-esque tentacle motifs. Levia itself has a fine name, though I would be a little disappointed if her name was meant to be a direct reference to the tentacle monster she becomes. It just makes her parents sound like psychic future seers. The last known character from Solana I'll leave for the end, for a different point I want to make. Okay, off to the west we see Metrix, a city name derived from the word metric, as in the metric system. It can only be described as contrived that the denizens of Metrix are mathematicians and engineers. There is no equivalent of Metrix in our world, no city which directly named after a mathematical concept. We do have cities like Newton, Massachusetts, or Euler, Switzerland, which are named after mathematicians, but not their mathematical concepts. If Metrix were instead named Teklavasan, I could accept it more as an independent and believable entity. But therein lies the next phase of analysis of Metrix. The denizens are, while not nearly as overt as Solana, quite punny. Dash could refer to a hyphen, but more likely her name is meant to mean speed. Dash.io then is a reference to input-output. I think Dash.io and Datadol can be given a pass given their lore, in that they are a result of computerization and metrics, though it is a little bizarre that there's such advanced technology taking place at the same time as medieval times, and I don't understand how these two things can interact with one another because they necessitate different surroundings. Like if you have computers, you have streets, and how has nobody seen streets that then can take that and put that in the Savage Lands or in Volcor, or you see what I mean? Like it just doesn't. This is an improv section, and I'm just going to get back to the script now, but I think you see what I mean. The two don't interact in the same world. It can't be possible. Anyway, Teklavasan, the character, being a reference to technology, Teklavasan is okay. It's a fine name. Vasan, in particular, is a fine surname, and I actually would have preferred Metrix be named Vasan. And then that leaves Max the Hype Nitro. I would like to speak with Mr. and Mrs. Nitro, Max's parents, as to the origins of their surname. Does Max come from a long line of street racers, like a blacksmith and blacksmithers? Verstappen, the Formula One driver, I believe does not have a name which means substance which can be injected into a working engine to drive faster. Underneath Metrix, we then see the pits, which is a sort of hollowed out cavern as a result of the mining Metrix does up above. Riptide, a name which I can only think is a nickname because it makes so little sense, denotes his seafaring ways as some kind of underground fisherman, hired trapper guy. Uzuri, whose name comes from the Swahili word for beauty, I'm actually really fond of her name. And Azalea, whose name I'm also fond of. The reason I'm fond of Azalea and Uzuri is they are both very memorable names that don't make some obvious reference to their surroundings. Finally, also hailing from the pits is Arachne, which is short for arachnid, meaning spider. There's two ways this can go. If Arachne is the nickname of a character whose name we don't know, then it makes sense to call Arachne the Huntsman, named after the ungoogleable huntsman spider. Seriously, don't do it. But if Arachne's name is actually Arachne, then it fails to establish him as a character. I can't imagine a single person in our world who would be so cruel as to name their child after a creature so horrible as a spider. To the southeast of Metrix and the pits, we see the Savage Lands, a name which is surprisingly generic in a world so full of references to other things. There we find Rhinar, Ko, Betsy? Olympia? It's not clear on the last two. Rhinar is very clearly meant to be rhino, which is an animal famous for charging at their opponents. I suppose I can accept a name like this, but I don't believe there are any rhinos in Rathe. There are bighorns, as depicted on the card Barraging Bighorn, but no rhinos. So I wonder why Rhinar's parents named him after an animal they've never known to exist. KO, when said aloud a few times, KO, finally makes the player realize that KO is named after KO, or knockout. While this is not particularly fun to think about as a name for a character, it also becomes even more confusing when we look at the original printing of KO and now the new Unarmed and Dangerous. The name was originally, at least I think, meant to be an autologicalism for how KO could do a one-punch knockout due to his ability text. That text in the new printing, Armed and Dangerous, I'm rolling my eyes right now. Do you get it? He has one arm. Doesn't even apply the one-punch knockout thing. Betsy, then, is a guardian named after the concept of betting or wagering. Do you see what I mean? When we realize these things about the characters, they become less characters in the world we can relate to, and more names in a game developer's folder for easy access and searchability through internal databases. They become cold. Betsy uses the wager mechanic. Wager is a synonym for betting. Done. Victor, because he wins a lot. Even when he loses, he can pay to win. Victory. Get it? Olympia is just obviously a name for Mount Olympus, the highest peak in Greece and famous for being where the gods were supposed to have lived. Olympia is meant to evoke either the Olympics or the gladiatorial games of ancient Rome. Kasai is a bit strange because she shares a naming convention with our next region, that being the Drakai and Volkai. The Kai or Sai suffix is interesting because it does invoke a sense of history and naming convention. It's probably my favorite thing currently in fab names. The prefix Kas, I believe, is a portmanteau of the swords katana and cutlass, or perhaps katana and sai dagger. If her name is a portmanteau of katana and sai, I will pass out with frustration. In any case, Kasai gets bonus points that her name has a recognizable origin point in Volcor. We can draw some equivalents in our world with names like Smith or Daughter, as in Grimm's daughter. Moving on, the Demonastery is a portmanteau of demon and monastery. It sounds like the name of a band a group of 14-year-olds thought was incredibly edgy. It sort of fits their theme, what with the chains and all, but to have that be the actual name is... Chain, on the other hand, named after the chain motifs of his artwork, and additionally the nigh on puke-worthy 1.5D reference to Chain's functions on the battlefield as having significantly long combat chains. Vincent, not originally from the Demonastery, just like all the characters do not come from the Demonastery. The closest pun/reference I can think of is that of a corset, and not a corset, but a corset. This is speculation on my part, but there is sort of a corset motif in her artwork with the Iron Maiden, and even more so, her name is that of a maiden. Iron Maiden is a reference to two things, a medieval torture device or the 80s metal band. And lastly, we have Viserai, another of the Volcor lot whose name is a mixture of that region's naming convention and viscera, which are entrails, or the internal organs, spilled out of the body. My speculation leads me to think he's named this because viscera, or because Viserai, is meant to be a living weapon, and therefore is a husk holding a sword, and so he is a cavity left behind by his own viscera. I don't like that his name is so overt in being viscera, so much so that a good portion of the population of fab players actually misspell his name on social media, and so I choose to pronounce his name with a Z instead of an S. Viserai cheapens the lore, though I suppose I can give it bonus points if it's a moniker given to him by Chain or Sutcliffe. Now we can finally jump northward to probably the most complex naming section of the game currently, that being Volcor. Volcor, an obvious reference to the word volcano, is a bit disappointing for a name of a capital. While it's not directly forbidden to name a city something like this, we have very few actual examples of that in our world. Now, you may be wondering why that's such a sticking point with me. Why do I care so much about that? After all, Rathe is a fantasy world, and the rules can be different there. I think that's a fair question. And the answer is this. Humans tend to like where they live, even if it's not great. If you don't believe me, go insult where someone lives, or imagine someone insults where you live. Insult the name. Call it derivative. Joke about its history. Most of the locals will, minimum, give you a weird look. I'm originally from a town called Kaysville. Kaysville is named after William Kay. At one point, Kaysville residents wanted to change the name to Freedom, but were talked out of it by Brigham Young, who was a local religious leader at the time. To the south of us is Salt Lake City, which is named after a giant salt lake. Kaysville is wrapped up in the history and lore of Utah, involving a religious sect who founded the state and divvied up land to the various old guys. So, it doesn't track with me that the people of Volcor would name it Volcano Land. We do have some examples of names for volcanoes, like Vesuvius, Etna, or Mount Ganui. Vesuvius comes from the word Veths, meaning smoke. Etna is Itho, meaning burn. And Mount Ganui is the Maori word for big mountain. But those are the names of the volcanoes. There is no city nearby named Mount Ganui or Etna, and there's good reason for this, because that's just not how people are. And speaking of people, there seems to be a struggle taking place between the two sects of the people in Volcor, that being the Drakai and the Volkai. The war seems to be of the civil variety, a revolution of sorts, but it's still a bit unclear. What we know is the emperor is a Drakai, whereas Phi is a Volkai. While I applaud the narrative development of this region, I do wish it wasn't so overt in naming races or sects of people after the two main gameplay functions of this region. Drakai, which is a mashup of the word dragon and kai, only serves to break immersion. Dromai does a decent job of obfuscating, and it's good that Dromai breaks from naming convention a bit, because if she hadn't, then Dromai would probably summon an army of dromedary illusions. As hilarious as that is, I'm glad it's not the case. Phi, on the other hand, our Volkai, is named obviously after fire, because of his fiery temperament, and more so, the fiery temperament of a volcano. Phi does get some redeeming quality in that it is an ancient Chinese name steeped in tradition. That it references a fire-focused character does actually cheapen that deep tradition though, at least to me. Also, bonus negative points for being an almost direct recreation of Zuko from the Fire Nation of the TV series Avatar, The Last Airbender. I do think people enjoy that reference though, so I've accepted that. People do like that. Then there's Kano, whose name is so overt that I nearly fell out of my chair when I realized it. Volcano? Really? Moving on to the northeast though. We come to the land of Mysteria. Pretty obvious one here, that the entire region is named after the word mist as in fog and mysterious, and is then built around the mysterious plague which afflicts the region. I struggle to think of a single other place named something like this in fiction. Why would the denizens of Mysteria name it that? Why is it the case that the mysterious plague begins to outbreak in the lands of mystery? It's far too contrived, despite my adoration for its visual style. The originators, then, are quite good by comparison. Azuri again, as evidenced by her young character art's border, but also Katsu, Benji, Zen, Enigma, and Nu. Katsu is a fried chicken cutlet with origins in Japan. While that's quite funny that katsu is a food dish, I actually don't mind it as a name because the word katsu also holds deep roots in the Japanese language. Words can differ in meaning drastically based on context, and Katsu's name does well to uphold that. Benji too perfectly captures the essence of the character without making some overt reference mechanics or nearby lorecations, lol, get it. This is less so in the later heroes from Part the Mistvale though. Zen, a name deriving from the same word but is actually a school of religious thought. It has deep roots in Buddhism and is more a state of mind than it is a name for a person. And I struggle to imagine the parents of Zen naming him that. It would be like me naming my daughter Prayer or something. Same goes for enigma, a word meaning mysterious or difficult to understand. While that very much is true in the gameplay, I have no idea what illusionists are up to these days and just say pass priority over and over again. I do think it detracts mightily from Enigma as a character. Based on some of her art, she does seem to have an enigmatic origin, and so perhaps this is a name bestowed upon her. Illusionists often do get a pass because they are such strange characters in Rathe that I could imagine them not having parents, for example. And then finally, Nu. Nu is a name whose origins I could only find is that of the Polynesian surname meaning to sing. And while I can imagine a concubine being a singer, as often geishas have many incredible talents, the second origin is the Japanese Nu meaning so or to sew. And while there is flowing garb motifs in her art's direction, I also don't believe this is her name's origin. This is a good sign, by the way. That I can't find an obvious reference is an example of decent world building. There is a more cynical reading of her name, which is that it's the prefix for nude, which I hope deeply is not the case, because it cheapens her character. I don't believe there's much evidence to support that though, so I think it's safely ignorable. And there's a point that I want to make. We're going off script here again. The point that I'm trying to make with this is that because I can't trace the origin of the name Nu, that it's not some obvious reference to something in the game, that it's not some obvious reference to something in the art, means that there's something for me to look forward to in the world itself. I can look towards a new thing, why the characters are named the way they are, why the monikers are given out, why this particular character is the most famous of news, right? This isn't just like a picky writer thing. This is like, there are legitimate reasons for why the world wants to be like this. And the reason why our world feels so real and so many fantasy worlds do not. To go off script even more double bit, look at Game of Thrones, for example. Winterfell. It's named after a year time, winter, and fell, which is another word for fur. And so they named it after Winterfur, so it's the wolf town, and that conveniently is why they made their banner a wolf, and they have dire wolves, and so on and so forth. It just, when it's investigated to any degree, it gets weird, because no longer do I feel like I'm engaging with characters who live in a different place, and rather I'm engaging with George R.R. Martin, the writer, and he's trying to get me to see all of these things. And don't get me wrong, George R.R. Martin is a good writer. He's an excellent writer. He's one of the best fantasy writers of all time. But that kind of stuff does bother me because it shows that there's this lack of belief in their own world. Anyway, let's jump back. Now let's go to aria, the Italian word for air, though I believe the aria word is meant to convey the operatic history of the word. An aria in opera, or music in general, can be thought of as a singer's solo, like unto a guitar solo. Arias are most often with the orchestral accompaniment, and so it's good to think of an aria as an opera singer's solo. This, I believe, is the actual reference of the aria region of Rathe, as aided by its visual design and intense focus on beauty of the region. Magic is often depicted as a flow of energy throughout the region, which can be capitalized on if one finds oneself in the right place. I think of flow of magic and aria to be an operatic singer solo, echoing throughout the region. While it doesn't make much sense for the denizens to call the land aria, I believe it is acceptable and even good for a name. The airy mountains reflect a wondrous sense of the region. The heroes hailing from Aria are also quite good, with one notable exception. The good ones are Briar and Lexi. Briar is named after the plant type briars, which are thorny shrubs and ferns. Her birth is somewhat mysterious, and I believe her name is bestowed by an ancient race of beings. Lexi, on the other hand, is a real name that fits her disposition. I have no complaints, and instead think it's a perfect name for her. Oldhim, on the other hand, he's named that because he's old? It's important to note that while Oldhim himself does not call Aria home, his ancestors did in Eisenloft. As much as I like Oldhim from an art and design perspective, the name is just rushed to me. It's too on the nose of his visual design to make him stand out as a real person. And then finally, we have the new heroes in Aurora, Florian, Verdance, and Ocilio, whose names I'll cover quickly because this video is already going long and we don't know much about them yet. You'll also notice that I've left off a significant number of heroes, and that is because I only chose to cover heroes who are playable and classic constructed. Aurora is an obvious reference to the auroras, which are light shows created by magnetic storms interacting with the gases in Earth's outer atmosphere. Florian is a decent name and is actually a reference to flora, which is Latin for plants, and originates in the goddess of plants in Roman mythology. Verdance is actually a reference to verdant, which is a color of rich green stemming from nature. And Ocilio is in reference to either oscillate, meaning to rotate in a semicircle, or oscilloscope, which is a device which measures oscillations. It's just another sciencey, techie sounding word. It's not my favorite. Bonus for changing the structure of the word for a name though, like Florian. And then finally, of course, I can't believe I forgot this one, Bravo. Bravo is not a real name. I think it's fine. It is at least distinct enough. You know, they could have called him Champion or Show Off or something. Bravo sounds enough like a name that I can be okay with it, but it is referencing the Bravo, as in he's a show performer guy. I could imagine it as a nickname, for example, and that doesn't bother me too much. Like, he's so well known. Though I do find it a little strange that he has a card called Macho Grande, which I don't get that at all. And that's all of them. That's all the heroes except for the last one. But before we get to that, I wanted to say this. While fiction doesn't need to mirror reality, reality is one such place where we believe and can follow the natural order of things. If we were to transplant my home into a fantasy world, Kaysville would be renamed Calowin, spelled with a Y, and Salt Lake City would be called Salthaven, because salt and avian creatures live there. It doesn't make sense. It's too designed, too well thought out. By contrast, there's another famous example of the river Avon in England. Avon comes from the Old Welsh word Afon, which means river. So the Avon River is actually the river. These sorts of inconsistencies and silliness is what makes our world a tapestry of nonsense and lends to its credence. I think by now you're probably starting to sense a pattern here. The names I do like exist as ends in themselves, rather than means to convey some autologism for the sake of game grokability. Again, Enigma as the name of a play piece is fine. It serves to instruct the player of Enigma's enigmatic nature in the game, her strange play patterns, and difficult to figure out game plans. Kasai being a portmanteau of katana and sai, or saber, serves well to instruct the players to put some swords in either equipment slot and start slashing. That is a fine merit. But there is a trade-off to this. The trade-off is the character is cheapened when it's obvious or discoverable that their name isn't for them. My name is Dylan. My name means, according to some Google search I did, man of the sea, and is apparently Welsh. My name does not denote what I do. In fact, I was named after Bob Dylan, the singer, not because I had anything to do with the sea. My parents just liked Bob Dylan and thought the name was nice. Dylan does not define who I am as much as I define what Dylan means. I would hope that every character in a world which I inhabit on a near daily basis would not be treated as such, because I don't want to think of all these characters as mere means to explain some mechanical end when I play the game. This is why I decided to finally cave and do the boring internet thing of complaining in a YouTube video. But I do think that this is important. I am struggling to connect to heroes as characters because I don't know anything about them other than their value math, power cards, specializations, and game plans according to YouTube channels and deck techs. I want to identify more, and I can't. I want to love the world of Rathe as much as I love the fantasy worlds I hold dear, and as much as the ones I've created. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't struggling to. And the ultimate point of this video is to make it clear that, while the old adage, gameplay is king when it comes to game design, gameplay isn't the only thing. And I'll illustrate that with my final example that you all probably thought I forgot about. I want to cover a hero I meant to cover way back in the beginning until I discovered the actual nature of her origin. Dorinthia is the hero who I've always considered to be the protagonist of Flesh and Blood. Dorinthia a hero who has a real name, is one of the originals, and has a unique quirk. As many of you now know, the community themselves have all adopted Dory as the short form for Dorinthia. Though if you ever read or watch something from LSS, they call her Thea, and I had always wondered why that was the case. Were they being intentionally obtuse? But after some digging, I found out that Dorinthia's name is actually supposed to be derived from James White, the developer of Flesh and Blood's grandmother, who I presume is named likely Dorothea. Additionally, I believe Dorinthia's artwork is based on the visage of the same woman. And when I learned this, it deepened my appreciation for the character immensely. She took on not just a history with the Iron Songs, but with something much more profound than that. Thanks for watching.